Hello, welcome back everyone for stacked soil moisture charts, following on from the soil moisture summed charts video that we did just previously. These stacked charts, sometimes called separate charts by people in the eastern states, are really a depiction of every sensor down the depth of the soil moisture probe. So if we hover over the sensors here, we can see that the top blue line here is at 20 centimetres, and then 30, 40, 50, 60 and 70 centimetres right down the bottom. And then our standard blue bars at the bottom is when the rainfall occurs as per normal. Soils are really quite funky things when we try and get them wet, and they sometimes have behaviours that we don't really see without doing measurements like these. So if we think about a soil like a sponge, particularly a dry soil, when it starts getting wet, the sponge doesn't wet evenly. It has little cracks and voids and things in there that channels the water through and down through the profile, and water moves into the soil at a particular depth and then over time distributes itself through the soil mass and, if you like, dissipates a little bit. And we can see that in these charts here with the peaks that we can see at each level on the sensors. There's a quick draw up with the rainfall as it gets wet and then redistributes through the soil mass. So we see that redistribution in a bit of a decrease on the back side of the peaks here. Where we do get a very sharp peak, like at the top of this blue one here, the sharp up and down is saying that the soil is getting really wet really quick and drying out very quickly as that water moves through that level and into the next level. So really typically those peaks are showing, if you like, drainage at that level and draining to the level below. So we can see here the 20 and 30 centimetres had a little peak. It's drained through those levels into the 40 centimetre level where we didn't get a peak. It hasn't drained freely through that level. It's rather bled through to the next level, which is a slower and slower and slower rise in soil moisture as you go down through the profile, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Most of the water hitting the top of the soil is the wettest and getting drier as it moves down. So we can see here, as the rainfalls come through for the season starting around the end of May, the 20 centimetre level's gotten wet first, then 30, then 40 and 50 and 60 and 70, as we'd kind of expect. And by the time we get through the heavier rainfalls we've had through particularly springtime this year, 2022, we get to the end of the chart here, and the bottom level here at 70 centimetres is really struggling to get any wetter. It's just gone up and just sat there the whole time. So we're thinking that without the sharp peaks at the top here, we're now starting to think that those levels are starting to get pretty full, and we're looking for any moisture that's going through to the subsoils in the bottom of the root zone below 70 centimetres. So we're on our trusty nil site here. So if we have a look at the lower stacked chart for nil, we will find how much water's gone through to the lower levels here. So we're now looking at the lower profile, 80 to 130 centimetres. So the top line here is at 80. This is really looking at the lower part of the root zone and that deep store of water that we sometimes rely on in the drier years to be able to get our crops through to the end. So we can see the first bit of water really hit 80 centimetres at around the end of July, whereas we were the end of May when it really started raining and making a difference to moisture at 20 centimetres. So it's taken end of May to June, July, 2 months in this particular year to be able to get down to the 80 centimetre level. We can still see those characteristic peaks, and by the end of the chart we're seeing that there's really much lesser peaks, as we know that there were heavier rainfalls through that first part of November, through this period here, and they haven't made those peaks. So we're getting to the point where these soils are really quite wet, They're not showing the peaks of drainage moving through them. The water's distributed through the soil nicely, and we can really with confidence say that the soils right down to 130 centimetres are pretty much as wet as they're going to get, which certainly, talking to everyone around the place, and as we know with the flooding and machinery access dramas this year, is absolutely to be expected. So one of the things that we'll be looking to do with this particular site is to characterise where the wettest level is in the profile. I think we said about 900 on the scale, and once we can get that dry point for this site, we can start to then do the percentage of bucket calculations that everyone really likes to be able to see simply how much water is there that crops can access. Once we've got those bucket calculations, we can then start to stick that in maps and actually see that across the landscape. So hopefully we'll get to the chance to get all of those required bits of information, the fall points and the crop lower limits, fairly soon, and we can start to get that really good information presented on maps. Thank you very much, everyone. See you in the next video.